Okay, next stage. I've unpinned all the pattern bits, and the only two on this simple dress that need interfacing are the back neck facing and the front neck facing. So that's pattern off. I'm now going to remove the cut work and put it to one side and talk about interfacing. Here at Snippets, we don't like the inert, very stiff interfacing unless you're doing something like a bridal bodice, when you've got to have something really stiff because you're doing corsetry. So for a lot of the work that we do here, we use an absolutely beautiful cotton voile interfacing. So it's a woven interfacing. It has a glue back on one side, so it's yarn on. And if you want to purchase that with your pattern and or material, obviously we can supply it to you. You can get anything to do with all of our kits from our website, which is www.snippetsneedlework.com. Okay, I've cut a piece of interfacing from the main roll just to make it easier to show you what I'm doing, easier to handle. Fold a section over, enough to take your two pieces of pattern comfortably. You check the straight grain by holding up the fold edge and pulling it to see if it's tight. As you can see, I've already placed the centre front section on with centre front fold to the fold of the interfacing. Pin that on, check the grain for the back piece, put the tape measure to the fold, and then match it up to the centre back grain arrow on the other side of this piece of pattern, and check that it's running parallel at the bottom, and then pin that on securely all the way around and cut them out. So I'll leave you cutting your interfacing while I go off and cut mine, and then I'll show you how they attach to the cotton pieces. Okay, so what we're now going to do is put the interfacing, which is the white stuff, onto the facing sections that you've cut in print. You start off on a decent flat surface, put the right side of the material face down. Interfacing, such as the one I've described, has the glue on one side, which feels slightly rough, like a fine sandpaper. That's the side you put face down onto the wrong side of your cut piece of material. You'll certainly know if you get it the wrong way around, which we've done here in the workroom, because it makes a lovely mess of your yarn and you then have to use yarn cleaning stuff to get it off. So that's the front facing. You do exactly the same with the two sections of the back facing, and then you need to take it to your iron and ironing board and iron them on quite a high heat. I would avoid using steam initially, because if you make it too soggy, the whole thing will ring, and then you'll have to stretch it all out or recut and start again. So I'm going to go off to my iron to apply these two together, and then I'll join you at the sewing machine in a minute. Okay, the next thing is to show you a trick of the trade. Any interfacing that you use that's an iron-on does have a tendency to peel back at the edges, which can be quite irritating because you have to go back to iron it again. So if you put the piece of the facing under the sewing machine and you use the edge of the foot as your guide, so I'm talking about a foot space, you then sew a foot space up the centre back. So, and then turn on the corner, come round the neck, and literally go all the way round into the armhole. Down that little section of side seam. and across the bottom. And this means that if your pressing hasn't quite fused those two together, it can only break back as far as your stitching line, so it's under control. Do exactly the same thing for the other two pieces, and then I will show you the next stage of putting it together. I'm now going to discuss the difference between zigzags on domestic machines and overlocking. So you set your own sewing machine up to a decent small, quite contracted zigzag, which will cover the edge of your fabric, and off you go down what will be your centre back seam. The piece of cloth that I'm using here is an offcut from the main piece that I cut the dress from. I'm not going to be sewing this together on a zigzag. I'll be using one of our overlockers for our finishing off, and I'll show you how that works next. Here we are now at the domestic overlocker, and I want you shortly to overlock each centre back line of the dress separately. So you'll put in a single layer and just overlock a fraction of the edge off. Piece that I've used is my trusty offcut from the other bit of sewing that I was just doing to show you zigzags. So that's a domestic overlocked edge, and I now want you to do exactly that, but down the centre back of each piece of the little dress. And you just need to guide the work to keep it in line with the upper knife blade. So that's one centre back seam overlocked. Do the same with the other one. The next thing we're going to do is just join the shoulder seams of the facings and the little dress. The first thing you need to do, I've got the facing sections here, is to find the little notch that you cut to remind you that the seam allowance is 1.5 centimetres or 5/8 of an inch. This is where you do have to start sewing accurately. So I find it easier to pin across the seam direction. So the seam is going to be coming down along here, and for me, particularly on a short stretch like that, it's easier to pin it this way. Put it under the sewing machine. Most modern sewing machines have what's called a calibrated plate, so that it's got measurements in 1/2 centimetre or its equivalent in imperial on the metal plate. So you need to find the one that says 15, which is 15 mil or 1.5 centimetres, and put your lever down at the back, and off you go. Go forward for a few stitches and then find your reverse button, reverse, and then come forward again. Take your pins out. It is very bad practice to sew over pins. It can break your needles, and it actually can damage the feed dog in the bottom of the machine if you do it. So we're going into the neck edge and get to the end and reverse, and then take that out of the machine, cut the thread off, and stitch the next shoulder exactly the same way, and repeat the process for the dress itself. Then I'm going to take the whole lot to the ironing board and press all the seams open. Right, I have joined shoulder seams and gone over to the ironing board and pressed all the seams open. It's better to do it like this because it reduces bulk, and I've done exactly the same thing on the dress itself. Press the seam open, and the next thing we're going to do is to pin the facing to the neckline of the dress. We're now at the most complicated part of this dress, and I do suggest that you lay it down on a flat surface exactly as I've done, because you'll find it much, much, much easier. Start off with the neckline, and I generally begin by matching the facing shoulder seam to its partner underneath and put a pin in. Do exactly the same thing on the opposite side, and then this is lining up a treat, so we're then going to pin the rest of the neck in, and it should sit flat. Right back round to the centre back. Make sure that your centre back edges line up. You will notice also on here that I haven't either zigzagged or overlocked the shoulder seams. You don't need to, because they're going to be completely covered by the facing. So it's a waste of thread, and it adds a bit of extra bulk that you don't need. Having pinned this, it's now back to the sewing machine. We're back onto the sewing machine, and you're going to line up the raw edges of your pinned work to the 1.5 centimetre line on the plate, and carefully stitch round this curve. And you may find that you need to try to pull the curve as you go. Try to pull it slightly straighter. It makes it easier to come round that angle. Come up towards the shoulder seams and always check underneath that the seam hasn't flicked in the wrong direction, because they can do. And that then means you will have to unpick it to get it to lie flat. Carry on round into the front of the dress. Slightly stretching it as you're going round the curve. Coming back round up to the other shoulder line, shoulder seam rather. Again, check that that's still flat. And round the back neck towards the centre back. Couple of reverse stitches, and that section is stitched. You're now going to trim that down and clip the curves, which I will show you next. We're now at the point of trimming away some of the seam allowance around the neck. If you leave all this on, it looks bulky and horrible. You need to cut a lot of it off. Where you did the original guideline on the facing for stabilising that together, that's a good point to cut up to. And you trim back all the way around the whole neck, back to the other centre back, and then I will show you how to clip the curves. The next thing you're going to do is to clip the curve. If you don't clip it, it will not turn over itself and sit down flat, so this part of the exercise is vital. Normally I'd start at the centre back and work round, but for the purposes of the camera I'm actually going to go the other side, and you clip with a smallish pair of scissors about a centimetre apart all the way around the back and front neck, just like that. So it splays the seam open when we turn it to the other side.